That's right. You and I will feel the pinch. The speaker company Sonos, based in California, is filing for an IPO. On Friday, it warned tariffs could force it to raise prices. Sonos says that could cause consumers to drive away and harm its company's reputation. You know, they're only one of quite a few companies with problems. This is really crucial. Ford says it will absorb the cost of the tariffs, but for now, it says it has no plans to raise prices on U.S.-made cars in China. BMW, meantime, will pass on at least some of the tariff. Last year, China imported nearly 100,000 SUVs from BMW's factory in South Carolina. Now, Grover Norquist says tariffs are a tax and a dangerous tool to use. He's the president of the Americans for Tax Reform, and he joins me now. You, of course, have been cheering for months on tax reform and the fact that the tax cut is there. Do you fear now that any kind of savings from that will be completely eaten up by this trade war?
Completely eaten up, no. I mean, the lower rates are permanent. The kerfuffle here on the tariffs is temporary. Now, temporary can still be too long. It is something, if we get through in the next month or two and we get settled back and have a better discussion of what our tariffs ought to look like and how we can have... The president's quite right in saying we need to get to more open trade. The tool of threatening tariffs worries me because the Chinese response, the European Union response, doesn't necessarily have to drive you in that direction. The advantage the president has is with the lower rates, with the stronger growth, with more people coming into the workforce and more people working, we're in a pretty strong position to absorb some temporary pain. But it's not free, and we don't know how temporary.
And not only is it not pretty, but it is angering some of Trump's own supporters, especially if you look to American farmers. And yet, what would American farmers say? One thing that you hear, and you've heard it even from the president, is like, let's just abolish all tariffs. Do you think that's a serious discussion moving forward, and what would you think of that?
Well, I think we should move towards abolishing all tariffs and just have open trade. We can compete with the rest of the world if we had no tariffs on the way in and there were no tariffs on the way out. You do have to police non-tariff barriers. The Japanese say they don't like the look of our rice or something. There's some things that aren't tariffs, but still.
Well, there's a million
barriers.
Excuses, Mr. Norquist, as you've seen. It's pretty ridiculous on how to categorize all that. As you said, everyone plays games, including the United States.
Yes, and we are not without fault on this. We've done it. Other people have done it. I think if we go to 0-0, that we are some of the big gainers. A lot of the problems that we have on international trade are self-induced. We were at a 35% corporate rate for decades. Communist China was at 25, right? We're at 35. The socialists are at 25. Germany was at 25. They could outcompete us because we took 35% of anything you earned, and they only took a quarter. That's not a bad head start if you're a firm in Germany or China. Our tort law is a mess. We need to have tort reform. And our regulatory barriers are kind of cluttered up. And there are ways to do some of the same things we want to do on safety and environment that don't cost quite so much. So we have our own house to clean up. The president has been moving in the right direction on deregulation and on taxes.
Just to interrupt you there for a minute, though, but are you going to stand by him when you are a conservative in America with your ear to the ground? Are you going to stand by him and this trade war if it really takes on some collateral damage in places where conservatives have a lot of support?
Well, I think the president understands that, certainly in farm country, which is free trade is very important there. My sense is that this begins to get wrapped up sooner rather than later. The Republicans in Congress have talked to the president about both the upsides and the downsides of the trade conflict. I expect that we will begin to wrap up what's happening with NAFTA and with China, with Europe. We may do Europe first. I mean, if China's left by itself, it may be easier to do that negotiation. I guess if I was in charge, I wouldn't have picked a three-front war to have a trade war. I'd have picked one at a time. But I'm not the president, and he's decided to try and rethink how we're doing this.
What is the damage that can be done economically, but also politically?
Sure. Well, of course, because the Chinese and the Europeans target their tariffs that they put up in response to our tariffs on steel and aluminum, and they do it to target political pain. That's not what we did to China. We were trying to solve a particular problem on overcapacity and how they sell through third countries. But the Chinese response is not based on some sort of sense that we're doing something wrong, but to have the most pain involved. The Chinese don't have elections. They don't have an election in November. The American government has an election in November.
But you are kind of stating the obvious. I guess what I'm trying to ask you is, what is the patience for conservatives for this? The Republicans at one time always stood proudly and staunchly for free trade. That's not what we have here. So how much patience do you and other conservatives in America have for this trade war?
Oh, I'm completely for free trade, and the Republicans in the House and Senate are, and people like Larry Kudlow are.
They're not sounding like it. They're certainly not coming up against the president on it.
Well, what you are doing is, I mean, the president's made it clear from the beginning. His goal is to get to lower tariffs and lower barriers for our goods and services. The weapon he's using to get people's attention, the punch in the nose, are tariffs. I don't know that that's the best tool that you use, but it is the one he chose. His stated goal is exactly what the Republicans in the House and Senate want, which is to get to lower tariffs. The danger, of course, is the Chinese and the Europeans don't necessarily have to go along with that. We've got a potentially radical new government in Mexico, which may decide to go in any direction. Who knows what direction they may want to go in. There are real risks involved in getting into a trade conflict. If this gets settled again in the next month or two, I think you'll see the stock market shoot up because there is some concern. That said, the fundamentals from tax reform and deregulation are so strong that the president has a lot more leverage and political support than you'd otherwise have. If you did this at the beginning of the administration, before the stock market moved up, before you had higher growth, it would be a different.
And
I don't know if they.
And that is certainly what the Trump administration is betting on. Mr. Norquist, we will continue to watch this very closely.
We'll
Appreciate
see.
your time.
Yeah.